Hello, my name is Beck and welcome to a list of tropes that I hate. We're just going to get straight into it and I'm going to start off with Belly of the Beast. So this is when characters end up in the belly of like a whale or an alien or a giant creature of some kind. This was in Deviate by Jay Kristoff for a small part of the story and I just recoiled from the story. It's not that I find it gross, it's just that I find it very limiting because it doesn't really let the characters do anything and there's only two things that could happen. They could go up or they could go out. So it really limits their possibilities and I don't really like that trope in general because it cuts everybody off. It also is just a bit gross. It's a bit gross, let's be real. The next one I'm sure you've heard me talk about before is miscommunication. This happened in The Winner's Curse a lot. The characters would just assume that each other knew what they were talking about when it came to political strategies that were quite complicated, and they just assumed that each other would be in different places and they managed to meet up and figure things out. And I was like, that's not realistic. If you've got a problem, talk to somebody, ask someone questions. I really don't like it when it crops up as a way to push the plot forward because characters just don't know anything. Oh, what are they going to do? It's very frustrating to me. Conflict has to come from characters communicating, and then a problem that they can't solve together is the problem that drives the plot. I just don't like miscommunication at all, and it tends to happen when characters have to make decisions and there isn't a hard and fast reason for them to do a particular thing. It often makes them act irrationally and out of character, and again, I don't like that either. The next two are kind of related. So I really hate Resurrection. I can't say any books that this is in because obviously it's going to spoil something about the book. But when there is a resurrection, it feels like everything is undermined in favor of bringing that character back to eventuate other plot points that they couldn't have tied up before. When a character is killed off in a book, I expect that to be hard and fast unless there is a very good reason why. And only very few books have pulled this off for me and been convincing enough for me to go, okay, there's still a bit of frustration that lies with me when I encounter this trope, but for the most part, I really don't like it. It has occurred in books that I've read. It has occurred in books that I've enjoyed as well. So again, it can be done in a way that I don't hate it, but whenever it happens, I still get frustrated and I'm like, can we just move to the part where they're either fully cognizant and they're resurrected properly, whether they're a ghostly form that can't influence what's actually happening with their friends and family. Resurrecting somebody conveniently erases their memory, which gets into the next trope that I mentioned, which is convenient amnesia. This one particularly frustrates me because it undermines a ton of character development and progression of the plot in order to get the character where they are now. So if it's very temporary, then that's fine. But if it's the thing that drives a lot of the plot and a lot of the character choices, it ticks me off and I can't deal with it. This again happened in The Winner's Curse, and that is definitely why I've underhauled that trilogy, because while it was interesting at the start and I did finish that was before I DNF'd books actively. I have regret because I didn't love that trilogy and I gave all of them about a 3 stars, if not less. I probably would have been more harsh rereading them now and either DNF'd them or gave them a 1 or 2 stars. Didn't love that trope. Moving on. The next one is Bury Your Gays, and this is when there is a cast of pretty much mostly straight characters with a token gay couple or a queer couple or a queer character, and then for emotional impact and effect, only that character is killed off. So they kill off the queer character out of everybody. If the entire cast of characters is queer in some way, then I guess that's more acceptable. But I just don't like this trope in general because it often happens to the person of color as well, and I just hate it. Why do you have to kill somebody off for emotional value that also has to be of a minority? And also that links into the next one that I want to get into, which is Woman in the Fridge, and that is killing off a woman in the book or the script or whatever to further a male's character growth. And this happens to some extent in the Red Rising trilogy, and I don't want to spoil when, who, or what event, but I hate that it is one of the driving forces for somebody in Red Rising, because why, if that woman was so special and so well characterized, did she have to be killed off for the sake of furthering other people's characters in the book? This also happened at a particular point in the Throne of Glass books, which really ticked me off as well, because the character that got killed off had the most promise, and that's what really annoyed me. So it's just a trope that gets under my skin because it basically kills off potential and it kills off the representation that could have been actually quite valid and valued about a book, and it just goes for the shorthand effect of, you know, short-lived emotional impact, and I don't like that either. Something else that I dislike It's more of a mechanism rather than necessarily a trope, but it is like a foreshadowing. And also, I think it's called Deus Ex Machina. I can't say it. I can spell it, I just can't say it. So I'll put it on the screen. It's when people are going about their normal thing in the plot, everything's happening, and then for the sake of a plot twist, the person who is writing it just pulls out, oh, by the way, there were fairies, or by the way, there were aliens and they saved everyone, or by the way, it was a dream and none of this actually happened and they were never in danger. It happened in Soundless in a similar fashion, not to any of the things that I've just mentioned, but that is a book that really pulled Deus Ex Machina, I think it's called. It just pulled something out of the air that didn't have any build up. And so when there's no build up, like there's no foreshadowing, even as subtle or as obvious as it needs to be, there was no reason to draw on that it actually happened. So it takes away the emotional value. It kind of unsticks you from caring about what's happening because it's such a surprise that it's out of left field. Sometimes I imagine surprises out of left field can be good, but only if they've been set up well enough to interlink with the world so that you understand why it's happening. Whereas in Soundless, when the twist came, I was like, I don't understand why this is happening. It wasn't built up or foreshadowed, and so it doesn't have any value to me as a reader in this story. So that is why I didn't like it. I'm just very grumpy in this video, apparently. The next one is Insta-love, and that is when characters see each other and they instantly head over heels in love. And I don't actually have a specific example for this, but when I've been reading YA, and I've been reading YA for years, it seemed to be the done thing, the popular thing, and I hate it. I just hate it because it muddles somebody's values completely and they become so instantly focused on this character that they're introduced to and falling in love with them and impressing them and doing everything in their power to be noticed by them, that partly that is realistic because being validated by somebody is really rewarding, but at the same time, it just sacrifices so much of their character growth to one point and one focus, and we're all multifaceted people. So to see it narrowed to one point in a book is what really gets under my skin because we are all more than just being validated, even though that's completely valid to want. It's a frustrating thing to read in a book because it makes it not multifaceted and that makes it less interesting. As soon as you put somebody on a pedestal, you'll never be equal to them. So I really don't like insta-love. I really don't like how the perception of it warps characters and it makes them single-minded. I just don't really like it. Similarly, I don't like love triangles unless, like in the 5th season, it turns into polyamory, and it's a very consensual and discussed polyamory. Other than that, it's just frustrating to read because we are, like in the previous trope that I mentioned, we are more than one facet. Everyone feels attraction differently as well. And I hate when there is a monocular focus on a particular love interest or attraction, and that ends up driving the entire story. For me, conflict and tension and interest have to come from multiple avenues in order to make a story interesting. And unfortunately, Frostblood, while I love the first 2 books in this series, the 3rd book, Nightblood, really went down that love triangle angle, and that drove a lot of the conflict in the book. Obviously, there was other major conflict, but that kind of took a back seat. And I'm like, guys, you're kind of in danger of dying. Maybe focus on the romance later and actually do the thing that you're supposed to. So that is why I didn't love the ending of that series, even though I do love the beginning. And I like that the character, rather than just being like, I'm not like other girls, and having these innate abilities that separated her from being like other girls, she actually had to work for her ability. And so while she was different from everybody, it was done in a way that was a unique spin on the trope that I liked. So that's when tropes can be good, but when they are bad, they get really bad. And that is love triangles for me. I really also dislike the girl hate trope, and that is a shorthand for causing conflict. So like Into All the Boys I've Loved Before, I haven't read the book, but I've seen the film. And so Lara Jean has this enemy number 1, and they just hate each other based on something they did when they were like 7 or 8. And it was just a fleeting moment and that's it. But this character has apparently harbored so much anger and jealousy from that moment, that stems from that moment, that she now hates Lara Jean, and they used to be best friends and now they're enemies. I really don't buy that. And I also don't like the way that women are pitted against each other rather than allied with each other in books. I love female friendship and I love conflict from a deeper sense, not just a petty, jealous sense that really makes the character seem very one-dimensional. I like it when there's a bit of depth there. And a good example of girl versus girl is actually in Skyward, when Spencer encounters other characters that are women, and instead of them pitting themselves against each other, which would be a very easy shorthand to set up, Sanderson doesn't do that. He goes down an avenue of these are all unique characters, they all harbour a respect for each other, and while they don't always love each other and get along, they at least have that respect. And I like that because it gave a different cultural and understanding of a background to each of these characters. And so from that you can respect their opinions and their beliefs and values and their personalities. And that is what drives any conflict, rather than just, I hate this girl and we're gonna go. It's an avenue where you don't have to be two-dimensional, but I feel like for shorthand, especially in movies, to communicate things to a viewer really easy and seamlessly, shorthand is often used, and it just gets on my nerves and I don't like it. Obviously it's in a lot of stuff, so I have seen it rehashed and done again and again and again, and sometimes you just gotta wear it and be like, okay, that's what is going to be the premise or the setup for this movie, but most of the time I see it and I kind of internally or sometimes externally cringe, because it's just something that shouldn't be perpetuated, because girls and women are awesome and we should start sticking up for each other. And if we keep seeing stuff in the media that pits us against each other, how are we going to learn to outthink that ideology? We've got to fight against it, and I think there needs to be a change there. I've seen a lot of female friendships in books and I really like what I've seen, but I would love to see more, as always. I've got about 3 more. So the next one is toxic romance, and that is when a character is paired up with somebody who is aloof and grumpy and gloomy and brooding, but when you look at it, you're like, that is just a red flag that is dressed up like a person. I'm gonna head the other way. So all that happens in these kinds of relationships, I don't have anything specific to cite, but I've definitely seen it, especially in YA, but also in paranormal romances as well, that there is this obsession with this more dominant masculine character. And I agree that that can be attractive, but when it is abusive and emotionally manipulative, that's when I'm like, return to library. Not for me, thank you. If characters have their own motivations, if they can communicate, sure. If it's consensual, yes. If it's not manipulated, amazing. But I've seen that shorthand stereotype of, or more like a character archetype of, those dominant characters that are very brooding, and most of the time they're pretty bad news. Like, for example, the Darkling in Shadow and Bone. We can see that he's manipulative, he's emotionally abusive, and that it is a bad thing. But when people were reading the books, I know that they got obsessed with the Darkling. So there is a fascination there, but at the same time it's not healthy, and I don't like the trope to appear in books that I want to love unless they are specifically painted as the villain or this person is not a good person in that scenario. I don't like it, but if it's done in a tangential way that is part of the plot rather than the driving part, and it's done well to emphasize that this character is not good, then I can get behind it. If it's just in there to make the character get into this dark romance, I'm not interested. Okay, the last 2 I often see in young adult books. So the first one is copious amounts of angst, which I just can't deal with anymore. I did like those brooding characters and I did love that angst, but for now, I think I've kind of grown out of it. A little bit of angst is great. Give me some characters that have inner turmoil, and I love that because it builds character, it makes people grow. But if you give me a lot of angst in a book and it only is one kind of major facet of this character's, I guess, development and growth and personality, I mean, if it's only a major part of their personality, like Mia in Nevernight, for example. I loved Nevernight, I loved God's Grave. Dark Dawn, but for the most part, I loved things about that series. And now I look back on it and I go, could I reread that because of how pretentious and angsty Mia is? I want to say I will and that I'd love it, but I think I read that at the perfect time to read it. And I've picked up a book that is Gideon the Ninth, and that is about a lesbian necromancer in space, I think. And that just had so much angst with Gideon's character, and it just informed who she was rather than giving explicit additions on top of that or reasoning on top of that. And I get that she had to be defensive in the chapters that we opened with because that makes sense, but it just seemed to inform so much of her internal dialogue, and I just couldn't connect with her anymore. And so I think if there is copious amounts of angst, I'm not going to be interested in the book or that particular character. This also happens with Rand in The Wheel of Time. He gets on his high horse mentally and he has a lot of angst and misguided behavior. That is what frustrates me majorly about him as well. So it's not just young adult, Wheel of Time is adult, so it can appear elsewhere, and I just don't enjoy it the same as when I read Nevernight. So I think that's why Gideon the Ninth flopped for me, and I DNF'd that book twice. Enough of it, like a drop is fine, but I don't like it to be the driving factor of somebody's character, is what I'm trying to say. And then the last one on this list is all the characters pair up at the end. You can have a book that doesn't have to be romantically inclined, you can have characters that are just friends, you can have characters that don't have to pair up in a romantic relationship to solve all their problems. So a lot of books exist on the we have to set these characters up in a relationship, and then it's a lovely book. And don't get me wrong, I love romance if it's part of a plot rather than the driving force of a plot. But if you're setting every single character up for romance, then I don't love it, because that is just a preconceived pattern, and so it helps me predict what is going to happen with the rest of the characters. I do love a series by Rick Riordan, and the characters in that often do get set up with each other, but not in a way that is immediate. There's a lot of growth, there's a lot of payoff, and so it's earned. It feels more earned rather than just a pattern, and it doesn't always happen either, so it's not as predictable. So I don't like it when characters all pair up at the end, because that is not what happens with everybody in real life. And while I appreciate a good romance, if it drives the plot, if it's going to naturally be the end game, then I can look at a plot and go, oh, they're not going to die, they've got a lot of plot armor, they've got to be in a relationship by the end of the book, they're going to be fine. So it takes some of the tension out of the book as well. So that is the list of tropes that I don't like. I've probably missed a few, but these are some of the main ones. So if any of these spoke to you, or if you have any to add, please let me know down below. I would love to chat to you. But again, thank you so much for watching this video. I'll chat to you down in the comments, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.